Peter Jacobson, welcome to An Actor Despairs. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Nice to be here.
Thank you for being here. It's a true honor to have you on. You have such an incredible and storied career, and I truly mean this from the bottom of my heart. You're exactly the kind of actor that I created this podcast for, and I'm so impressed with everything that you've done and that you've carved out in television, film, theater, Juilliard, Brown. I mean, what an honor. It's going to be incredible to get to hear how this all happened for you. So thank you for your
Well,
time.
thank you, and that was very sweet of you to say, and it's totally my pleasure. And communicating with other actors and just telling our stories and hopefully, you know, learning something from each other is a great thing. So thanks a lot.
It's always the goal. So let's start at the very beginning. You grew up in Chicago
I did. I did.
and suburbs or city?
No, in the city, born and bred. Well, actually, I was born on the south side, in Hyde Park, and then we moved to the north side when I was about seven, and I was in the city for until I went to college. But there's a point of pride. Of Chicagoans generally are kind of nuts about their city and being from Chicago, but there's always a little bit of an extra oomph also if you're from the city. I think that, So I'm glad you made me make that distinction. You allowed me the chance to, be that much cooler that I'm from the city and not from the suburbs.
I love that. I asked that because my father's from Elgin. So I grew
Oh,
up
all
always
right.
going, yeah. So,
All right. We used to
yeah.
play Elgin Academy in soccer when I was in middle school and high school. They
Oh,
were in the
really?
suburbs. I'm not denigrating your dad in any way. I'm just, taking my opportunity to, shake out my urban bona fides.
Love that. Deep dish all the way. Well, I got to ask, how did this start? Were your parents artists?
Have this meaning this career start.
Well, no, just let me get more specific. The interest in arts or the exposure to arts. Do you
Um,
remember your earliest?
yeah, I mean, certainly my parents were they weren't regular 9 to 5ers. My mom was an artist. She was a teacher and also an artist. She was a sculptor. And my dad was a journalist. He was an on-air anchorman for local news. Anybody who grew up in the same time I did in the Chicago area would remember my dad as a sort of a prominent figure in local TV news. So I grew up with that, which was pretty unique, being the son of this guy whose face was on the buses and
Wow.
billboards, and there was did a political commentary as well as anchoring the news, and so he was a controversial figure. And anyway, I was sort of swept up in the life I remember as a young person of the news and journalism and the newsroom where they did their sort of what was then sort of a revolutionary newscast. He and Bill Curtis, who was a very well-known anchorman, they did this. They were sort of the first local station to put the news in a live newsroom without sort of the WBB MTV in the back. It was they were exposed to the whole newsroom, so there was all this sort of blurry activity in the back. And I would go with my dad to go with him to the 10 o'clock news that they would do live every night, and I would go probably 3, 4 times a week just to sit back there, not to try to get on the air, but just to sort of, I loved the hubbub and the AP and UPI wire machines were clicking right by his desk. And I would watch him get his makeup on before he'd go on and he'd take it off. And there was something very dramatic and live, obviously, about that. And I always sort of think that maybe that's kind of where I might have first gotten a bug to, be in some kind of on-camera dramatic thing. But then I was doing plays when I was a little kid and never stopped loving that. So those two things combined.
Thank you for sharing. That's so amazing. And I guess there is kind of a level of performativity to anchoring and
And
especially
certainly,
commentary, you know?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was very unique in those days. Now it's funny. My dad is constantly railing about that these days. Anchormen are no longer anchormen. There was a big distinction back then. I mean, John Chancellor was the national commentator, and Walter Cronkite was an anchor, and you didn't that line was never blurred. It was the integrity of journalism was that you always knew when you were getting commentary versus the delivery of the news, and that's how I grew up, and that's what journalism and on-air journalism had always been. Newspaper print, those were where the editorials really were, and in Chicago was Mike Royko was the sort of the big New York political commentator. But my dad broke new ground being an on-air commentator, at least locally. I guess in New York would have been like Gabe Pressman if you're
Mhm.
from the East Coast. And yeah, every day would take all day to sort of research and get set a 2-minute commentary, and they would say this is now commentary. And today You don't know. The lines are completely
Yeah.
blurred. You tune in to Anchorman on a certain network knowing you were getting basically nothing but commentary on both sides of the political spectrum.
Wow.
And my
That's
dad gets frustrated watching that because he was, he's a creature of that other era, and it's like, wait a minute, is that news or is that your opinion? I don't want to see you crying when you're at the anchor desk about how upset you are about what happened. That's not what an anchorman does. So it's an
total.
interesting twist.
So interesting. Thank you for sharing that. You mentioned you were doing theater. Were you doing youth theater at this time? Like when you were,
Just in school. I never did anything outside of school shows, and the fourth grade play was really fun. And I remember I never stopped loving being in the plays. And I went to a school that had a lot of theater. And then when I went to college, I started gravitating more towards theater. And then after that, I went to graduate school for theater, and that's how it was born for me.
well, let's break it down. So then you go to Brown, and
Mhm.
at Brown, are you studying theater?
I didn't major in theater. I sort of figured that I would at least try to. Uh, I hadn't committed, I guess, to being an actor when I got to school, to
Mhm.
college, and it took me a few years to really sort of realize that I was going to commit and go on to study it further. But by then, I'd already committed to a different major, thinking that I might go to law school. I didn't want to be sort of stuck graduating. Not that there's anything wrong with a theater degree. I just thought if I wasn't sure, there would be other avenues for me if I had a political science degree. But turns out by the time I was a junior or senior, I was all my time was in the theater, and I might as well have majored in it, but I didn't. So I just did that other political science work on the side, and spent all my hours and days in the theater.
Was Trinity Rep there at that time?
Trinity Rep was totally there. In fact, Paula Vogel, who was how do you know Trinity Rep? Are you from the area?
No, I'm an actor. I've
Oh, you
auditioned
know
for
Trinity Rep?
Brown.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Paula Vogel, who's an incredible playwright, How I Learned to Drive, she won the Pulitzer for that. She was a theater professor and drama teacher at Brown, and she helped establish, after I had graduated, but not that long after, the consortium, which was Trinity Rep and Brown University together. I think it's a school, and it's sort of a bigger company. But when I was there, Trinity Rep was the great local repertory company, and that was something that we all sort of aspired to.
That's amazing. Were you doing shows in Providence, like in your junior and senior year?
Yeah, well, I never worked at Trinity Rep. There were some
Oh, okay.
actors when I was there who did like over the summer or even during school, and it was like, whoa, that's an amazing. But no, the most professional I did in college was the summer theater where we got paid, and that was sort of for a commercial audience to come in. And we did it on the lovely Leeds Theater there at Brown, and you get a summer audience for people in the area. My very first paying job, though, when I was at Brown, I don't know how much Providence history one knows, but Buddy Cianci was this sort of larger than life mayor for decades, and he was basically a mobster. I mean, Providence is a very Italian city, and there's a large mafia presence over the decades. I think it's different now, but Buddy Cianci was this like something right out of The Godfather, and he was just this tough, sort of mobbish kind of character. He would spend time in jail, and then he'd get out and he'd be reelected. And they did some sort of thing where he was coming out of City Hall, some presentation, and he got into a big old fashioned, crown, like the Queen's stagecoach with horses, and then would get driven away. And it was something he was doing for himself, and he had put out the word to the theater professor. They needed a couple people to dress up as beefeaters, to be on the back of the stagecoach, and we would get like $50. And the theater teacher came to me and said, "Do you want to do this?" And I was like, "Yeah." So I made some money. I was like a sophomore, and I dressed up in a costume that I would never again be able to dress up as, because what I've learned about the business is I'm, going to play lawyers and doctors and not, 18th century British beefeaters. But I got
Wow.
to do it then in 1982.
So cool. And I'm curious, at a certain point while you're there, you said it kind of happened towards the end of your time at Brown. Did a shift start to happen in your brain where you were like, acting is very much going to be it for me. Poli sci law is not going to happen.
Yeah, I
And
mean, go ahead.
oh no, and at a certain point, because for a lot of actors listening, I think some actors are, so green-eyed to go straight into grad school, and some take a break. Did you already, I guess, start to have grad school for acting on your mind while still in undergrad?
I was for sure. And I think that was just a product of the place I was, and the vibe at the time at Brown was very much, it just sort of seemed to be this whole space where people were training for and focusing on and talking about and getting ready for auditions for further study, be it any kind of graduate program, UC Irvine or at Yale. And so it was sort of in the water. I mean, there were a lot of actors that just graduated from Brown and went on to New York or Chicago or LA and just had great careers, but there was definitely like a group who were focused on graduate school. And interestingly, the class right ahead of me, there were two actors, Laura Linney, who has got a huge, fabulous career, and Tim Blake Nelson, who's also an incredible career as actor and writer and director. And these are, there are tons of talented people, but these two, this other actor in our class, Willis Sparks, the three of them got into Juilliard, and I was very close with them, and we were doing plays together always. And I was just somewhat lazily just sort of aware of the fact that they were going. It was exciting. I didn't really know what it was, but I knew that they were getting another 4 years to not be in the real world and going to this amazing place. So that's how it really got on my radar, was there was the success of the guys ahead of me with these graduate programs. So I auditioned for other programs and had my eye kind of on Juilliard. And I think, again, I just sort of, I had a good day of auditioning, because it's real hard to get into, and I don't know what it's all based on, but that the momentum started for me in terms of graduate school already with these guys ahead of me. So I sort of had an eye towards that.
And were you already developing your pieces that you would ultimately, and when you said you did a few, did you do the trifecta, NYU, Yale, Juilliard?
Yeah, I auditioned for all three of them. Totally.
Do you remember them?
At first I did you can do you go to different places around the country. I went down to Illinois State University over my Christmas break my senior year. I remember driving down, or Southern Illinois, and you could, all the different schools would come there. And like I was auditioning for schools like University of Delaware and, Irvine and, Missouri. And I don't remember what places I got into, but they were looking for actors to be part of their graduate program. But I had a special place in my heart for NYU and Yale and Juilliard. And yeah, so I was, there were enough other people auditioning that we were, working on our pieces together, and that became sort of part of my senior year, was, polishing these audition pieces. And then I think I got called back at NYU, and I don't think I got called back at Yale. But when I got called back kind of early at Juilliard and then got in, I was like, okay, done. I'm withdrawing my applications elsewhere.
Wow. And do you remember the day when you found out you got in? Did you have an awareness of what a momentous...
Yeah, it was, my first thought was, I sort of hinted at this, was, okay, I've got 4 more years of school. It's like, I didn't have any kind of sense of what my career would be. I think you get, a lot of expectations get built when we all do as actors. There's expectation everywhere. It's just sort of baked in. And going to a graduate school like that, I was like, well, this will put me on a certain track and be a step up in it. And I am not denigrating that. There were definitely advantages to going, which I can talk about. But at least in reference to your question, my first real thought was, oh, wow, I don't have to worry about what I'm doing next. I'm essentially, because Juilliard is longer. Most of the schools were 2 or 3 years. And Juilliard, because it's an undergraduate conservatory as well, you can get a BFA. It is a 4-year program for which I got nothing but a diploma, because it wasn't an MFA program like Yale.
Oh, they didn't have it yet.
No. Well, I think Juilliard, some of the kids in my class were in the BFA program because they were finishing off their college degrees, but it was a 4-year program. So even though I had a BA from Brown, I needed to go through all 4 years in my acting group. I just didn't get an MFA. I got a diploma. But I was 26 when I got out of school, and I think at 22, when I got accepted, I was like, well, this is cool, because I'm going to a program that's really prestigious, and I don't have to worry about being a real person for another 4 years. And sure enough, I was 26 years old. I had a locker. I was, running around in dance belt. Most people start working when they're in their early 20s, and so I was a little delayed in that way. But
I'm also delayed. Thank you for sharing that. I'd be curious, I'm sure we could do a whole podcast on Juilliard, but how was your training there,
I loved it. It's very different for everybody. And you said, there are different paths. Is graduate school the way to go for actors just starting out? nothing about it made convince me that it's the thing you have to do. It's totally personal, and for everything from financial to just where you're located and what your aspirations are and what's come before. I was hungry for real intense training, and I wanted to be in New York, so it made sense to me. But there are actors who have been going to college in New York, and they don't need to be in New York any longer in training. They want to go to LA. It's really a personal decision, and you've got to really want to be in that kind of intensity for that long. And I was hungry for that. So Juilliard initially, it felt really good in that way. The hardest part was that there really were this was 20, 30 years ago, and they were tougher then. I think that the world has changed, education has changed, the industry has changed, and it was a scarier place than it probably is now. I'm not saying it's not tough and it's hard for some people, but they would cut you if they didn't like what you were doing, and the teachers were just. I think it was just to me it was intimidating, and because they really attacked my way of working, which in hindsight, that's exactly what I wanted and needed, was that I wasn't going to grow and change as an actor unless I had a whole lot of adults, people that I respected, working with me on not doing what I had done previously, but really stretching myself, physically, vocally, just in terms of how I think, what kind of material I can look at and attack. And that was exactly what I needed. I probably arrived pretty cocky, like, yeah, I was doing a lot of plays of Brown and I know what I'm doing. And I think it's helpful as an actor to always say, well, wait a minute, I'm not certain. Because once you get certain, then that might be trouble.
And in this kind of break you to make you methodology, do you feel like it allowed you to be able to kind of start to at least find your voice as an actor? Like, do you feel like you got on your 2 feet and you really started to understand your place?
Yeah,
And
I think that that's a longer process than I knew was happening. Again, you're in a system and in a program, and there's competition and there's expectation. And so I was probably, I went through some rough patches, but I would come out of them feeling refreshed, but also probably still a bit confident and certain and arrogant in that refreshment. And it wasn't until, I think, in any part of life, like we just grow in whatever we do, and in your 30s and your 40s and your 50s, those are the decades when you settle into whatever you're doing, because you settle in as a human. Maybe you have family and you just know yourself and the world better, and you're a smarter, more grounded person. So that, as an actor, I think that's where I found my voice as I've gone on. And the beauty of acting is that you can still, sometimes you're in a career where if you don't find it or a certain part of it, you're out.
yeah,
There were many times when I thought about, like, well, I'm out anyway. But I'm grateful that as a character actor, I feel like my voice is yet to come in some ways. It's funny you say the word voice. And Juilliard, when I was there, and I think even today, they had a reputation as being a school with a real voice. It was like, oh, I went to Juilliard. And, you could imitate the Juilliard actor who was, carrying a spear in the public theater in the summertime, but he talked like this, because that's how we would talk on stage. And there was an element of that, and I always fought against that, because that didn't instinctively feel right to me. And I think that you could get out of Juilliard sort of with your training on hand and in front of you. And nobody really wants to see a trained actor, because the point is not to be trained. The point is to be real and authentic in yourself. So you have to pick and choose the things that have been kind of slammed onto you at Juilliard and see what works for you. And hopefully some of the more organic stuff will sort of settle in. Like, yeah, I know how to now adjust my natural Chicago Midwestern accent if I need to. I now know how to approach a script in a certain way, and I know how to approach Shakespeare. But most importantly, I think I learned how to take care of myself without a director, because in the world, you get out there and sometimes you have the best directors, but boy, you better be ready to be left alone and know what to do in front of a camera or on stage, and take care of your own process. And I think I learned that more than anything.
thank you for sharing. I'm
I feel like I go
curious.
on and on and on. Tell me.
I love this. No, you're doing great.
Long
Please.
sentence. Stop.
No, please. This is amazing. This is exactly what I dreamed of this show for.
Good question. Great question.
by the time you graduate, you start to have an idea that there's the showcase. And I'm sure, born and bred Chicago, was there by 4 years is a long time for anyone in New York City. Did you have an idea of staying in the East Coast at this point? Were you thinking about
Um,
LA or
no, I wasn't. LA was not on my radar. I always thought I would love to be in TV and film. I'd be lying if I said, no, I was always a theater actor. I mean, I imagine myself doing plays. I still imagine myself doing plays, but I always, as a kid, wanted to be in movies and be on TV. Um, but strangely, I think Juilliard is so New York, and my friends who were ahead of me were in New York, and you get a showcase in New York for agents in New York. I think my whole class stayed in New York. The only question for me was whether I would go to Chicago, but that didn't come up until about a year out of school when I was really struggling to get work in New York and feeling really vulnerable and frustrated and upset. I was like, I got offered to do a play in a small theater in Chicago. I don't know how that happened, but I was about a year out of Juilliard and, living in my apartment in Hell's Kitchen, which was really Hell's Kitchen back then. Now it's like the West Village.
it's crazy?
Totally different ballgame. I mean, when I was at Juilliard at Lincoln Center, to diverge here a bit, this was like the mid '80s, and the crack epidemic was raging. And I would walk down from Lincoln Center, which is 66th and Broadway, down 9th Avenue to my first apartment at 48th and 9th. And like, if you walked looking at the sidewalk, you were dodging crack vials, and like it was a really ugly time. And New York was pretty gritty, and that neighborhood was rough, but it has changed a lot. I'm not sure why I'm talking about that, but anyway.
No, no, that's I agree.
So I got this offer to do this play, and I normally would have been like, no, I'm staying in New York, and because if I can do it here, then I can really do it. But I was pretty despondent, and I thought, you know what, I'd like to go home. And it's just probably a smaller market, and I'll be around family, and I just feel like maybe a change would be helpful. And
Was
emotionally,
Steppenwolf going at this time?
what?
Was
Oh yeah,
Steppenwolf cooking?
Steppenwolf was really big, and the Goodman, and all those great theaters. And I thought, there's obviously a huge community there. I just felt like if I'm going to try it, let's see what it feels like to be doing it with home base in a way. But then I wound up. I hadn't made any hard plans, but it was beginning to form in my head. And then these stories always happen right when you're thinking something. It's always that way. The best way to get work is to go on vacation. So, you do something that you don't want to have to come back for work for. And then the universe calls out to you for some reason. And I wound up getting cast in the non-equity company at Williamstown Theater Festival. And then from there, a week into that, I wound up getting my first big theater break, which was one of the Dromio of Syracuse, which is sort of like the main Dromio in the Comedy of Errors in Shakespeare in the Park. So I went from being like, months from like, this sucks, I'm going to Chicago, to suddenly having the lead in Shakespeare in the Park. And I was like, okay, I'll stay.
Oh my God.
And then a whole new level of expectations, and like, it's going to be this happens. And then it's never that. It's always, it's never what you think. And that's one of the beautiful things and one of the horrifying things about what we do. And I have to say, what turned me on to your podcast right away when I got the invitation was an actor despairs is just, that's fabulous, because we all know an actor prepares. I just laughed out loud, because that's it's known, but like, we don't spend as much time as we could sharing with each other the despair part, because you can prepare all you want, but despair is there.
Yes.
Everybody's got a different personality, and their levels of despair differs, and everybody's journey is different, but despair is the word, man. Even if it's a little bit elevated, like that's what we have to do. We go through despair to get anywhere in this business, I think, more than most. And that's why I love actors and I love what we do. It's like, you got to get through that shit. It can be despairing. It's always right there. Always right there.
Yeah.
So it's a great title. And
thank you for sharing that. I worked really hard on it.
It's awesome. Like a vision. I was like, wait, of course, an actor despairs. 35 years I've been doing this, and like, what?
It's awesome. Also we can meet. I love it. It's all working out for a reason for both of us.
Right.
So obviously doing the Delacorte lead, that's a game changer at this point. Are you then Are you starting to get in for some of the great 90s, Tom Fontana, Homicide, Life on the
I am
Street?
not. Most definitely not.
Wow. So,
You said that's a game changer. Things are game changers, and it was a game changer in the I suddenly changed my sense of what I wanted to do. I wasn't going to go to Chicago, so yes, I my game change was I'm staying in New York. But you're talking about the things that we do despair about. That I was like, because in comes the expectation. It's like, wow, I just had a great fucking day. I just got cast in the lead alongside Boyd Gaines, who was one of the great theater actors and just actors of my time. And he was my, we were partnered up in the show, and it was the Delacorte. I had seen plays. I was like, it was like, yeah, all right. I sort of, this has changed the game. And like you said, I was thinking that. Here comes The Wire, and Oz and NYPD Blue. These are the great gritty shows. I mean, I'm being a little facetious, but certainly I thought this will open many more doors. And certainly the result was many fewer doors than I thought there would be. But that's so relative because it's all about I of course was like, I don't have to audition now, and I did. And it's a different journey. So there are kids who get out of school and they never have to audition a day in their life because they get the thing. For me, it's always been a boom, a step up, and then another one, but nothing that ever made it suddenly like, oh, I don't have to audition anymore. I'm still auditioning. Sometimes I get offers, and I'm obviously in a whole different place than I was 30 years ago, which I really am grateful for. But there have been no like massive game changers for me, like where suddenly you're in a different stratosphere. It's always been sort of a steady bump up to another level, and that's cool.
and there's just so many I could pull credit wise and ask you about, but like, talk to me about your experience in the 90s before we kind of move into the 2000s when like television was really cooking and broadcast and cable were at the
Yeah,
heyday, things that are
yeah.
so
Well,
sadly.
I got out in '91, and I don't know the cable. I don't remember where exactly cable was because I remember when HBO and The Sopranos and Sex and the City. I think that was like late '90s, early aughts, maybe '90, maybe as
Yeah,
early as
you're right, because
'95.
you did like 4 HBO movies, right? You did 60.
Yeah, and some of those
Yeah.
were early, those were earlier. So I'm saying yes, mid '90s was when like Sex and the City and The Sopranos, suddenly that took a level of gritty and like naturalism and just like great TV. Suddenly it was like boom, that's appointment TV, and everybody wants to be in those shows, and they're very New York shows. Before that, when I got out, NYPD Blue was I think in its heyday, and that was had been another step up in terms of like really ragged, steady cam. It wasn't steady. It was like, you're really in on the action. That was the new thing. And again, really gritty. And I love the Dennis Franz, who was, the star of that show, was NY, so New York, and yet the dude was total Chicago. He was like the flattest accent, and he was like this New York cop. I was like, like that guy sounds like Dennis Farina. So Chicagoans always got a kick out of that. But yeah, I got my first talking job on a TV show was one line as a reporter in NYPD Blue, and then my agent just literally last night was like, was as good as it gets, not as good as it was. It could happen to you. Your first line in a movie. It's this Bridget Fonda, Nicolas Cage movie from like '93, and I had once again like one line as a reporter. So there were those shows. Well, the other one was a movie, but NYPD Blue was big, and then when The Sopranos and HBO started to get big, then suddenly there were a lot more of those kinds of shows, along with Friends, which was of course the dream because this was like an incredible comedy. So there were still these classic sitcoms happening while the sort of gritty cable was getting its legs. So that by the time we get into the new century, the new millennium, suddenly we're really the birthing of what we know as fabulous TV today was really sort of taking hold.
Amazing.
But
Thank you for this.
I did, I never was in Sex and the City. I was one of those shows I auditioned for like 80 times,
Wow.
and now I go back and watch them. I'm like, I could have played that. I think there's not a person who speaks in that show. I'm like, that guy. Oh my God. It's like, it's all of us in that show for the '90s, except for me, but that's okay.
I love that. In this amazing time, and also for the actors listening right now, some people love it, but it can be also frustrating this time of self-tape. Talk to me about this great time of all these classic American shows and probably auditioning in the room with the
Yeah.
casting
Oh,
directors.
well, I could go on forever about what's, how what that shift has done and how I feel about it. And I know how a lot of other actors feel about how we do it today. But yeah, I remember I auditioned for the Sopranos pilot. And when I got the script, I just saw Sopranos. And until I got out to the studio in Queens, is it David Milch? Or I think whoever the great David is who created the Sopranos.
Oh, it's I know exactly what you're
Chase, David
talking.
Chase, David
David
Chase.
Chase, yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
So Chase is there in the room, but I didn't know who he was. And it wasn't until I got in the studio and saw all these other actors, like, like real Italian looking guys, which I kind of sort of maybe pass for. Jews like to think they can be Italians. Italians can be Jews any day of the week. It's much more romantic. And I thought the whole time, I was like, well, this is a musical because it's like some weird TV musical because it says soprano. I had no idea what soprano meant. I must have not read the script because it probably would have said Tony Soprano. But I was like, I really thought it was some weird hybrid musical thing. And then I got to the studio in Brooklyn. It was like, Silver Cup, one of those big sprawling Queen
Yeah.
studios. And there were all these tough looking dudes, in the corner getting ready. And I went in, I was like, oh, no, this is this kind of show. But yeah, I auditioned for Sex and the City, and you'd be reading for I forget his name, the guy who created that. And The Wire, yeah, I met
Yeah.
Tom Fontana and Barry Levinson, who I wound up actually getting to work with a couple times later. And you start establishing those relationships. Talking about what's different now, I think I worked on a couple Barry Levinson films because I met him in a room for some small part 30 years ago, 20
Wow.
years ago for a show, and maybe I did something or we had a conversation or I said something funny. Somehow he got, oh, there's a guy I might want to work with one day.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that can't happen today because you can really create a great piece as an audition, but there's that great sort of unknown, I'm out, your tape just goes out into the ether.
Ether. Yeah.
Who's watching what where? I've been despairing about the lack of in-person auditions. But
Same.
back to your point, the 90s, yeah, that it was that time. You knew you were reading some pretty cool, gritty TV shows, and it was really great to be. Those shows wanted to be in person. Those auditions, you wanted to feel the energy. I mean, I think that's always important, but
Yeah.
something about that material being new, and it would have been weird as hell if you weren't in the room.
And before we obviously jump into House, doing Billy Crystal 61 and all these amazing shows, you said you did Oz, NYPD Blue, as you started to get into the aughts of the 2000s and, DVDs start becoming a thing and there's money going around in the business in a way that just doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
What were you kind of learning that the marketplace was telling you? Was it always character actor, reporter, lawyer,
Well,
or
the
at that?
marketplace was telling me, yeah, character dude, as I was joking before, lawyer, doctor, and that was sort of one of the first big 2x4s in the face that you get when you start out. You have
Yeah.
expectations, and yeah, I've been in an institution. I've been in high school, college, graduate school. I was 26, and I was playing great parts. I could play anything because there was always a small pool, and I was the character guy. But when you're in New York and you're in Hollywood and you're in the industry, you're going to play the guy that everybody else thinks you look like you should be playing. And I, to this day, feel like I'm butting up against, well, Jacobson does that. And, you'll do something like House, which is fantastic and game changing in a lot of ways. And for the first few years after that, they're like, well, but he's just a doctor. So there's this sort of built in weirdness that makes it all sort of like two steps forward, one step back. But I certainly felt right away in the marketplace, I'm not playing romantic leads. I'm not going to get to do this cool accent, the stuff I did at school.
Yeah.
I'm going to be a doctor and a lawyer. And, I've been fortunate enough to play a lot of really great doctors and lawyers and guys in my wheelhouse in great shows. And so to me, it's not that it's a doctor or it's a lawyer. It's always ultimately about, is this a good show? Is this a good character, a good script? So I don't give a shit who he is as long as he's interesting. And so I've been lucky to do that. But yeah, then the market was also about network show. And, you go out, the pilot season was, I don't know how old you are, but you look
I'm
like you might
34.
you might not
Yeah.
remember this. It was, like January after
Yeah.
Sundance was over until April when they started shooting the pilots. That was like 4 months, January, February, March, whatever, of like you go to LA or you do it from New York and you get a pilot, hopefully, and then hopefully the pilot gets picked up and then hopefully the show, because it was all just network TV. And it was a great gig because if you're on the pilot paid a lot, and that could last you for a while, and if you got picked up on it, then you're talking about some serious money. And when I got House, that was a big game changer. But now, 15 years on from House, you could see that change coming when House was winding to a close. Streaming was coming up, and it's still the golden goose would still be, if you're talking purely financially, a network show like a
Yeah.
20 season. It's still there, but the vast majority of the shows now, and where the writers are, and the intrigue and the grit and the pushing the envelope, is all streaming and cable. And now, my first, I guess, real good cable series was Colony, which was in USA, which
Yeah.
it was right before streaming picked up. So I think that's sort of what killed it. We did 3 seasons, but I did 16 episodes a season on a cable show. And that's pretty good. Right now, like, you watch a show and I'm like, I just got turned on to Pen 15. I'm like, this is just the best thing I've ever seen. And there's only 10 episodes. I'm
I
doing
know.
The Diplomat is this fabulous new show. I'm just settling in to watch a fabulous show, and they're giving me 6 episodes.
I
Are you
know.
kidding me? So it's frustrating creatively, but for the actors, yeah, I would give anything to be on one of those shows and to make money on that show. But if you're doing 6 or 10 episodes, you're not coming close to changing your financial life the way that a network show could. So
Yeah.
it's just those opportunities are just no longer there in the way that they were before.
And thank you for that. Wow, that was amazing. I'm curious that you mentioned, obviously there were so many pilot seasons. Was House that for you? Was it a pilot that
No. Well, it would have been. It was, I think, 2004 was its first season. And I don't know that I auditioned for it. I mean, I was in New York. I never moved to LA. So I missed a lot of, there's just a tonnage back then of what was happening in the studios in LA. That was where you had to be if you simply just wanted to get a pilot. You'd audition in New York, but you'd go on tape, and every now and then producers would come in. So I don't remember auditioning for the pilot. And when I look at the show, I don't see a role that I might have actually even read for. By the time I came on late, I came in on the 4th season. They were rejiggering the cast, and I had been so I got to sort of get on this monster hit already in process. But one of the things, again, it's about the kind of networking that you don't really get today. I had auditioned for a show that one of the producers of House had done years before and gotten a small part on that, and she remembered me from that. And when I went in she called me in for the House character, and we were in the room and we got to sort of reconnect, and it was really like, oh, she and I remember each other and we have friends in common, and that's you feel like you're building a relationship. And so
yeah.
that was, I think, part of how I got slid into House. And I don't know that you can have those opportunities as much today.
I know. I hate that. But you did, and for 98 episodes, and I'm sure that's also, we could do a podcast on that. But what was it like when that was like the biggest of the big, Hugh Laurie, Olivia Wilde? Like, I mean, how was that ride?
Well, amazing. And it was, when I came on in '07, it was, I think, between like from halfway through the season before and into my first season or two, it became the most watched show on the planet. It was always top 10 in the United States, but it was internationally just somehow just a monster. And you really could feel that. You go anywhere, and people are like, from all around the world are like, oh my God, House. So it was also weird though starting out, because I was in this sort of reality show to begin with, where they were auditioning us in the show, like trying to become a doctor on the team, and you were literally trying to become an actor on the show. So I did this 9-episode bizarro arc of, am I going to be on it or not, with Olivia and Cal Penn and some other people who came close. And then I got picked out of the group, and along with Olivia and Cal. And then suddenly, so I was like, I got to know the cast, but you weren't a regular yet. So you're navigating the sort of weirdness of being a guest, and Hugh, who's just this monster talent and fabulous guy and intimidating. And so you're managing all that. And then it was sort of this delay. And then I was picked to be a regular. And then suddenly I'm on it. And yeah, it was incredible. The writers, back then you had like 15 writers
Yeah.
on staff, and they were doing a 22 to 24 season show, and they were using my character well, and they got to know me, and I got to know them, and that begins to sort of infect in a good way the work you're doing. They're writing for you, and it's a family. You get 5 years on a hit show. I don't know that. I mean, boy, would I feel lucky to get that again. It's great to be on a show where you really know you're coming back the next year, and
Yeah.
it relaxes everybody. There were dramas galore, of course, for that, but to be on that show, that kind of a hit, to this day, people come up to me all the time who are really impacted by the show. So you're doing something that is out there in a meaningful way for a lot of people. People who say like, "Oh, my daughter went to medical school because she loved House," and it's like, wow, how
Wow.
cool. Just
That's
some kind of impact. That's a nice thing.
and how did you keep it fresh? That procedural type
Well,
dialogue that
that's weird too. I had never done anything like that. I was just sort of getting my legs in terms of being in front of a camera, really. I'd had the last 2 years, I'd done like the Billy Crystal movie and then a couple miniseries right before I got House. And that was the first time I'd ever been sort of like on a longer stretch of working in front of a camera. Because my first 7 years were all theater in New York and then pilots here and there, but I had never been on anything long term. And I was sort of learning how to bring it all down as an actor. I mean, you're trained for theater and
yeah.
Shakespeare in the Park, and that's nobody wants to see that on in their living room at 9 o'clock on a Thursday. So it was all I had to, and they didn't teach that to you back then in graduate school. It was like it's all for the theater. So I'm teaching myself, and with the help of other actors and just experience of how do I communicate and express with less. And it was the repetition of it that really, I think, I found my legs, and to be able to play a role that changes. I mean, I did a play for 5 months in New York, and sometimes you want to just crack your head against the
Yeah.
wall because you just can't think of how to do anything different. It just becomes numb, and then you have to recreate it within the exact same context every night on stage. There is a genius and brilliance in that, and I'll never not love it. But it's a new challenge and in some ways, an easier, more thrilling challenge to get a different episode every week with the same character over 5 years. You're going all over the place, and if the writers like your stuff and the character is well written and it's a wonderful ensemble, that to me is the most fun I've ever had. And I
Wow.
got to do that again on the show Colony. I did 3 seasons as a regular, and the writers were fabulous. Ryan Condal, who now does House of the Dragon, that was
Wow.
Colony was his show, and he's a wonderful writer. And again, it's interesting because it's about like you do a Shakespeare part or O'Neill or these are great roles that have been played by actors through the decades and centuries, and it's not really yours. I mean, you make it yours for that production, but Benvolio is
Yeah.
Benvolio, written 400 years ago, or 300 years ago in a specific way, and it's your interpretation. When you're playing, and this might seem obvious, but there's something about doing it as an actor that is thrilling. When I'm getting to be Dr. Taub for 5 years, that's just me, and they're writing to me. So it's a very different experience, and it's really lovely. It's a great way to act.
That's amazing. I'm just so proud of you. I know I don't even know you, but it's just so incredible. And obviously, did you keep the imperative to kind of keep theater going as all this was going on?
I got seduced, understandably, into the financial difference
Yeah.
when you're behind the camera, when in front of the camera, than on stage, and life, personal life goes in a lot of different directions, and so there are different needs at different times, and so that's all to say that my first desire has been to stay. It's what I know now is the camera, much more rigorously than I know the stage, and it's there. When you get something, it's a much easier payday, a much bigger payday for a lot less work, and I like that. Not that
Yeah.
I like the less work. I like that I can support myself and my family, with that kind of work. But that being said, I do miss the theater, and I feel like I will always want to do that. It's just it's got to be the right time and the right place. And in my life, I did a play 5 years ago. Was the last play I did had done, and that was some one acts that Ethan Cohen, the great
Yeah.
filmmaker, had written, and we did it in LA. And I hadn't done a play in 5 years before that, maybe even 10 years. So I was suddenly back on stage, and it's like coming home, and it's like it's a muscle. You realize the muscle of it is more intense, because you got to do it every night, and you're on the spot because you can't mess up, and you get to really rehearse, and there's a rigor in the rehearsal. TV and film, depending on the show and the product and the money and the time, you might not rehearse at all. You just get in there, you do it, and it's in the can, and you never see it again. But you do the same part every night, and you've got a month to prepare it and work it, and just the camaraderie, the energy that inherently brings for a cast. It's different than a TV cast, and that's what I grew up on, was that theater cast, and I just loved being in that again with the stage. After the show, you go and you
Yeah.
get a drink, and I
Yeah.
miss that.
I love that. That's
Yeah.
amazing. Well, obviously, you got to come back and do part two, and because I can keep talking to you forever. But
Sorry,
for
I go on too long,
no,
and
no,
you get all your questions.
I'm making sure that I get you out in time.
No,
But
I'm
please
okay.
come
We
back.
can go on for a little bit if you want. I came late.
Okay,
I came
cool.
late, so you're
Okay,
good.
cool. Well, so then talk to me. Obviously you did Colony, and then this kind of taken us up a little bit before the pandemic. And I know I'm skipping over a lot of things for the viewers listening, but you've such a storied career.
No, I want to hit every role. I have something to say. I have something to say about everything I've ever played, and you're going
I,
to want to hear it.
at, at a certain point, did you, in house, did you decide to finally move and stay west? And did that
Yeah,
start to?
never did. I was on house. I was commuting. I had my son was 5 at the time that I was picked as a regular, and we were committed to having him be in New York, and so I did a lot of flying back and forth. So
Wow.
I never experienced actual, living in LA. Um, so house, and it was unique to do that. I mean, I think people in house were kind of like, "Why are you getting on a plane every weekend?"
Yeah.
But I could afford it because I was on house, and it was the way to do it, and it was a great experience. And then Colony was the first 2 seasons were LA, so I was sort of back and forth with that, and then Vancouver, which is a little bit further away. And but no, to have a show in your hometown would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious then for you, after you kind of got off these shows, then were you kind of looking to just focus on films for a bit and maybe get away from a long-term commitment to a character on a show, or do you very much
Never
enjoy the
had any
medium?
desire. Never had any desire to get away from a long-term character. That is, my desire is
Yeah.
I know, but it's a good point. It's like that to me, at least for me, it remains the holy grail ongoingly, because if it's a good show, it would be, it's again, you can support yourself, you can support, you can make money and be in a good artistic situation. But film, it's interesting. Film, TV, I somehow never, I haven't had the as many opportunities in film as I have had on TV. I started out doing a lot of small parts on some big films
A
in
good night
the
and good luck, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Even before that, like As Good as It Gets, and like some movies, like I would have like a second with Mel Gibson or Robert De Niro, and but I was just thrilled to work with these directors and just to be there for a minute. And then I thought, okay, well, I want to get bigger parts in film. But then my stuff always just happened to be TV, and I've loved it. Weirdly enough, Smile 2 was my biggest film role in as far as for a long time. It doesn't seem, he speaks in terms of somebody who actually has a presence and is important to the story and speaks a lot. It's not a huge part, but he's substantial, and that was really cool. I was like, great, I haven't done that in a long time. It's all been TV, but the great thing is that TV. I mean, when I was getting out of school, film actors did not do TV. The film
Yeah.
was the goal. TV was great, but it was a big divide, and that divide has been blown away. And I think we would all know that now TV is actually where the great writing is. Hollywood has changed with the blockbuster even more than ever, and the indie films were, in the early '90s were exploding, and that was great. But I didn't get a shot at those. Like, guys like Stanley Tucci and Liev Schreiber who came out, and they were doing really great shit in these indie films at that time in New York. And I always was just like, Paul Giamatti. I was always like, wow, I would love to do that stuff, but I didn't seem to get those opportunities. But the TV started coming for me, and
Ray Donovan, right? I mean, you got to
yeah,
work with Liev on that.
yeah,
Was
no,
that
Liev was
post
good.
Colony?
Yeah, I knew Liev. I knew from when he got out of Yale, and he and I got out of grad school the same year, and I saw him at the Berkshire Theater Festival doing plays, and then and so I felt like I kind of known him forever as a theater guy, and so it was really a joy to work with him on a really cool TV show that it almost felt like theater. It was really great.
Yeah, that must have been so amazing. And
Yeah.
I love that for you. And I'm curious, as you've obviously gotten to work in the best time in the 90s in the business in the early 2000s, as you started to see the business change, were you starting to kind of try to, maybe like I got to start doing some streaming things now because cable's changing a bit?
Yeah.
I know you did fly me to the.
Oh, well, go ahead. Sorry.
I know you've done some things. I was just curious, like, is that coming from your agents at a certain point? Like,
I think it's funny because I've never, I do know actors, some who have really huge careers and some who don't have such huge careers, but they just are really specific that this is the thing that I really do want to do. I want to do a streaming show, and I'm not as interested in this. Now, I'm not saying I don't have strong opinions about what I think is good material or not good material, or I want to do this instead. I would prefer this. I mean, I would, a stream. I don't have an aversion to anything relative to a streamer. It would be whether or not it's a great show. It just seemed that the bulk of the great shows, in terms of the writing and the ability to really push the envelope, have been in these streamers and in this new world of TV drama. And so I would always want to do that. And again, I don't prefer it. I guess I prefer it if the material is good. I'm not, my agents don't say, yeah, we need to get you on a streamer. I think they're just like, yeah, we need to get you the next great job. And
yeah.
that could be a network show. And that would have its advantages and its disadvantages. So I guess my point was that I'm not say that I'm not picky, but that I sometimes would laugh. I'm like, why am I like, how come I don't have this like, no, I am an artist for Netflix and that's it. And I will only do the gritty drama. I'm not bullshit. I want to work and I want to make money and I want to do good. I want to do a good TV show, a good film, a good play. And wherever that is what I will, nod my head towards.
I love that. And thank you for sharing that. How did Smile 2 come your way? Was that a audition? Was that an
Yeah.
offer?
No, it was definitely an audition. I was just, I think the role was one that, however, comes out in breakdowns and goes through your agents, saw that, oh yeah, that's a good role for Jacobson. It's this sort of schlubby, anxious, scruffy dude, with somebody who just seems to be,
You're a good looking guy. I want to see you romantically. We'll make it happen.
Okay. Out of sorts. And I play out of sorts folks a lot. Not sure why. So whatever happens that an actor gets an audition, there just was one of, it was rare that it was a film and it was a bigger part in a film, not unheard of, but, and I just read it. I was like, oh, God, I love this guy. He talks a lot, but wow, dude, he just seems so sad and anxious to me and just really well written and a lot of exposition, but he's making sure we all know the smile curse, but it was really well written. And so I just went on tape and it's the whole new world now where the advantage is you get to take as much time as you need or have to make the audition you want. You are not hopefully, smitten by the nerves in the room. Yeah. And I love those nerves and I love that relationship with a director or casting director. And I think it's critical to get that.
It's better. I miss it.
I do. Ultimately,
yeah.
If I had to choose, somebody said, look, you screw these tapes, you're back to the room, I would take it in a second.
Same.
I think I got work by the stuff that happened off script often. But I do have to say that, as I get older and it's harder for me to, it's harder for me to hold on to material sometimes. I need to work harder in some ways. And I do like that I can create my work and that I'm putting forth, I know, my best work. I can do it again. There is an advantage there, but then that piece is out there. God knows if anybody's going to watch it. So to your question, I did what I felt like was a really good piece with a character that I really liked. So I loved having that opportunity with Morris in Smile 2. And then you put it out to the universe and then you forget about it. you can't go home and say, God, I was downtown at Avi Kaufman's office and the director at Avi, we really hit it off. And I made this joke and they laughed and I think they liked me. And boy, I'm going to get this part. That's just gone. You're like, you do
Yeah.
your tape and you're like, please somebody see it. And the director, Parker, saw my tape for Smile and liked it. And so I had a Zoom call back, which is, I guess, a step in the right direction because it's live, but
Yeah.
you've got this bullshit going. I've done readings, I've done script readings for TV shows like the read through, the cast read through, only on Zoom. And it's like, half the people are like in Disneyland and it's blipping out. And like the writers are supposed to get a sense of the script through the read through. And are you getting that with this
Yeah.
Zoom thing? I don't know. Anyway, so I had a Zoom call back and I did call my friend Cal Penn from House, who had been in Smile 1. And I said, hey, you want to put in a good word for me? And he was like, of course. And so I'm not saying that that's why I got the part, but I'm a hustler and I will do whatever it takes and cover every angle to
Yeah.
maximize my potential. And I think the role made sense and Parker liked me in it and I just got the like weeks later I was like, oh, I'm not getting that. And then it's like I was at the Honda shop and my agent was like, you got it. I was like, wait, what? Oh, that one. Oh, I love that.
Amazing. You're amazing in the film, and it's so
Thank you.
incredible
Thank you.
the work that you did, and congratulations on the
Thank you.
success for that.
Yeah.
I'm curious, I ask every actor this question, and it's particularly difficult now to answer with where the business is at, but for the actors listening right now, as we've been speaking about no longer having the physical world of audition rooms and how much the business is changing with like it's only comic book movies and movie stars do TV now. And
Yeah.
everyone's kind of that's getting their start is kind of trying to figure out this new business into whatever it is shaping to. Any words of wisdom you have for those fighting the fight?
Yeah. Well, it's weird
Either,
because I come to it with more years than you, and so I've seen a bigger change than you, but you've also seen a big change. Anybody who's not literally coming out right now has seen a huge change. I mean, COVID was one of those. That's a once in a lifetime change, but
yeah,
it energize what was already changing, I think. But yeah, the bottom line is you're right. We're looking at a landscape that I don't even recognize. So it's hard to like. I imagine I don't know. It's hard to give advice from that far away. But I'm in it. So I think ultimately the same points stand, which is that you do. I mentioned that I'm a hustler and I'm always looking for whatever angle that you know. We're in a world now where you can sit in your house even more than ever. And when I came out, I really was like, I'm getting out of my apartment and hitting the pavement and doing something that will help me in any way as an actor. And I can imagine coming out now, it's like there's a certain, I don't know, there's just a certain stasis that the industry is, the new audition world is allowing people to just sort of I don't know, in the internet, you don't have to go anywhere and do anything. I don't know what that means generally, but I do know that for a young actor, you just keep in mind that, your hustle and your work outside of what you're being told is what you can do and how you get roles. Stay in touch with people, stay in contact, network, write a letter to a director who you've heard is considering you for a role. If I hear ever that I'm like in the mix, which means that maybe I've made it past that first round of 800,000 people. No, if I hear I'm being considered, I am like, do I know anybody on this project? Who is a producer? Do I know somebody who knows somebody? You want to be respectful always, and there's a fine line in our business between being a pain in the ass or just doing something inappropriate, and also being like, no, I'm going to write a letter to this director. I've done this. I've gotten roles twice, I think, because I wrote a letter to a director after I knew I was being considered, but you're in the mix. You still got to beat out at least two or three people, and that's not enough for me. I'm going to do whatever it takes, and who knows what it does take. But I wrote a letter and was like, hey, I know I'm being considered, and with respect, here's why you want me in this part. And I think that's worked. But every now and then does that opportunity come up. You got to stay aggressive and stay connected to your world, your actors, your friends, your family, and make sure that you're not despairing too much. Because
yeah.
outside the friends and the family, that's where you're going to not despair and stay healthy in this sort of more segmented world. And a healthier actor, a happier actor is going to be a better actor on screen no matter what.
Absolutely. Amen to that. Thank you so much for that input. And I'm curious, anything upcoming that you're excited
Um,
about?
well, Smile has been sort of my focus because it was, it was a
You're
sort of
incredible, and it's still in theaters. I had to
yeah, I
go.
mean, it was the
Yeah,
#1 movie in America for like its first week, but that's sort of got a built-in thing. That's a genre I've never really done, and it was just an audience for that, and it was exciting to be a part of that. And so I was, doing publicity for that, and that was neat. But I had before that, or right around the same time, I'd shot a couple indie films that I can't really talk about you know, what they are, but they'll be coming out down the line. And I did just do an episode of the show Found, which is a network show that I didn't know much about, but they shot in Atlanta, and I was out there last week down there, and what a lovely group of people. Again, back to network TV. When I get a chance to do something on that, it's so often that you get people who are really, really, those are smooth running machines. And so you've got a lot of relaxed people doing good work. And it was really fun to work with them down there. I don't know when that episode comes out, but I'll have to tell my mom before I tell you. Otherwise, I'll get in trouble. Because you don't remember, if you're doing TV and film, it's sort of a nice problem to have. But like something will come out on TV that I'd shot like 8 months ago, and my mom's like, what? You didn't tell me. I heard from my friend
oh man,
that you were on that show, and I was like, I didn't know. I forgot. I'm sorry. It's a
that's
nice problem
amazing.
to have.
Great problem. Peter Jacobson, this was such an honor. You have to come back for part two. I never do part two with many people, but
Well, I'm happy to come back. You're
yeah,
terrific, and if we were saying things that is helpful to actors in any way, then I'm all over it. So
so helpful.
let me
And
know.
I'm so proud of you. You're doing
Thank
incredible
you.
work. And
I
I feel like
appreciate that.
there's so many more amazing things coming your way. And
I
I'm
hope
just
so.
so proud of you. And I really hope we get a chance to work together one day.
Just let me know. Oh, I would love that. I would really
Yeah.
love that. And I love what you're doing. And so if I can help you more, be happy to.
Thank you. And let's just say to be continued.
You got it. I'm
All
there.
right. So
All
much
right.
love.
Thank you.